thank you very much for the nice introduction and to the organizers for inviting me. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to be here, and a bit intimidating also because I won't be presenting any hard facts or numbers. Most of what I talk about is probably familiar to you, but it's just the reflections from my experience as an editor in a high-profile journal for more than 7 years now, and hopefully you'll find some of these reflections useful. So the title is slightly changed since I sent the abstract. This is about the kind of research that is needed to move forward the sustainability debate, going from the making of it and the use of it, basically. So this is a brief outline. I'm going to give a very, very brief overview of all the most pressing societal challenges that require different kind of research that are relevant to sustainability. And then when we talk about solutions to these problems, what exactly we mean by it. And so in order to find those solutions, what kind of research we need to develop, and what are the challenges around that kind of research, and then what kind of collaborations we need to establish for that research to be actually effective. And then hopefully there will be time for some questions at the end. So here is a non-exhaustive list of some of the biggest challenges society has been facing over the last decades, and they're becoming increasingly pressing. And I'm not going to go through all of this, obviously, and I'm sure Lee's missing some, but the idea is just to try and get a bit of context for what we're talking about here. And it goes from some of the challenges that are more strongly socially oriented or socioeconomically oriented and well-being oriented for people to some that are more strongly rooted in the environment. And they're all relevant if we talk about sustainable development and improving the well-being of people living within, the limits of our planet. So what is it so problematic about tackling these challenges, basically? They emerge in interconnected settings. Is the interface or the interaction between society and the economy and the natural world, which we are all very familiar with, and we know this raises complexities. As I said, they're increasingly pressing. Here are just some example of what we mean by interconnection or interlinkages. And this is more to reflect on, again, the kind of research that we need. So for example, if we think about road transport systems in big cities and, problems of congestion, space, viability of, the different, the fleet of vehicles on the road, and then air pollution, which is connected, and so the consequent public health issues, and then how do we tackle these problems? We tackle it from an engineering perspective, from a city planning perspective. What is the role of behavioral change of individuals, for example, to try and move away from private road vehicles into more public transport and so on? So all of these issues could be studied and analyzed in isolation, but then what kind of solution that would tackle the multiple problems would we be able to find if we did or went down that route, right? So we need to understand these problems at the intersection. We need to understand these problems connected rather than isolated, and that's what we need to do more so. And there are a lot of science and examples of this being done in academia, but we need more of it and more urgently, right? So what is the problem with interconnected issues is that the drivers of those problems are complex because they are linked. And that's where what we lose when we separate the issues and we try to address them in isolation. So we obviously can look in depth into one issue, but we lose that kind of interface. And so we lose an understanding of what the trade-offs are if we intervene. If we want to solve a problem and we design an intervention that doesn't look at that interlinkages, then the solution is missing some of the trade-offs. And we could try and resolve an issue, but causing more other issues down the line, because we're not factoring in what those trade-offs are. And I always use an example like climate change mitigation is a very good example, because climate change is so high in the agenda right nowadays, after all the work the IPCC has done, and the Paris Agreement, and so on and so on and so forth. So we all know that we need to decarbonize the energy system, but is it just possible to do to intervene and design policies to decarbonize the energy system without looking at any knock-on effect on other issues? You need to build more solar panels. What do you need to build more solar panels? You need to build more wind turbines. What do we need to build more wind turbines? How are we going to create other environmental impacts that we're not factoring in? We're just focusing on one, which is one target, which is decarbonizing. Or do we want to look at those interfaces? So that's basically the idea here. And so we need a more holistic view, which is what a lot of you are fully familiar with, of these issues that are at the interface of human and natural systems. But this is more easily said than done. That's what I have experienced in years of reading papers on environmental problems. And then we talk about solutions and innovative solutions. What kind of solutions are we talking about here? We're talking about technological solutions. Those are the most visible ones, right? New devices, new materials, new processes. But we also need institutional changes and innovation. We need to change the structure of our systems, and we also need to redefine the policies, looking at these kind of interconnected issues. And that's, again, it's a big problem, because all of the policy departments in governments in most countries are not set up to do interconnected work, right? So ultimately, what is it that we need? We need a shift in perspective, which, again, has been debated by sustainability scholars for decades now, but still not happening, right? Not to the level we need, not definitely at the level of decision making. We need to move towards a vision of a future in which humanity has regained basically that deep sense of belonging to the natural world. And that at all levels, going bottom up and going top down. That's what we need. So what is the role of academic research in this endeavor? Definitely multiple roles. First of all, academic research on sustainability can inform the complexity we have been talking about here, right? It can build new knowledge, more and better knowledge on that complexity, but it needs to focus on the complexity though, right? And then it can support, by producing that better knowledge, decision making. Although there are some challenges there, it can definitely inform better decision makers. And it can also help that change ultimately in perspective with good communication strategies and dissemination of the research. So here we come to what kind of research, which is the core of what I want to talk about. So the current dominant paradigm of hyper-specialization in research and academic research is not adequate to deal with complexity. We cannot, as I said, separate the drivers of a problem or separate the issues and then analyze them in isolation. We're losing a lot by doing that when it comes down to complexity. I know it's been established because obviously simplifying and then allowing to zoom in a lot. But for sustainability and global environmental change research, we need to zoom out a little bit, right? And we need a deeper understanding of those interactions that go beyond the contribution of a single discipline. And I'm very passionate about this because I have been talking about the role of interdisciplinary research for many years. And I see some groups are doing interesting work on it. But I also see there's still isolated examples. And yes, we need to understand the interface between humans and the environment, but we also need to understand better how we operate ourselves. Because ultimately, we are using the natural environment and impacting it. So we need to understand better how our systems, our economies function. And how individuals in it are operating. So what are the drivers of behavior and groups, how groups interact? So if we make an intervention in a context without knowing the social and cultural context, we might fail even if the science itself has said this is a good intervention, because we're not taking into account the role of individuals and how they make decisions. So it is complicated. So here, what I want to give is some reflections of the different definitions of research that are moving around the space of sustainability and sustainable development. One comment I want to make on this list is that these are not mutually exclusive categories. The boundaries between these categories are quite blurry. There is a lot of overlap among them, and people use this term in slightly different ways. So what I'm going to give you here is, my own interpretation, which is up for debate, okay? But the idea is interdisciplinary research is not bringing together as a collection of things, different experts from different disciplines. Interdisciplinary research is trying to conceive the research differently by blending visions and methods, and that's complicated, okay? Transdisciplinary research is the co-design with users of research. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of it is solution-oriented, some of it is policy-relevant, and what's the crossover is. So as I said, interdisciplinary research is the intersection of disciplines when we conceive the research, when we design the research questions. And we try to use the perspective from multiple disciplines and angles, and then we come to an agreement of these are the research questions, these are the issues that we need to tackle. And so what is ultimately the goal of interdisciplinary research is to build knowledge. A lot of I've heard about interdisciplinary research being solution-oriented. Yes, but not quite. Interdisciplinary research is building new knowledge, it's integrated knowledge. It's the cross-cutting knowledge. It's zooming out and understanding those connections. But this is knowledge. So in a way, you could consider it fundamental research because it's building new knowledge. It's understanding mechanisms and drivers. It's just not specialized. It's a different kind of knowledge, right? And where are the innovations here in blending methods rather than coming up with new methods? So very often as editors, we face this kind of issue with interdisciplinary research, that we try to select the most innovative papers and then we keep asking the person, okay, where is the innovation here? These methods have been used in the single disciplines for a long time. So where is the innovation? The innovation is in the blending. It's bringing them together to answer an integrated research question. And so the knowledge that comes out of it is bigger than the sum of its parts, right? And so you need a proper mindset to assess it. And usually, as I said, so the innovative contribution is in the bringing them together. Transdisciplinary research is obviously oriented to define research questions that can respond to a problem, that can inform a specific problem very often. And it's not an easy one. There are specific challenges to develop transdisciplinary research. It is being increasingly explored by academics and engaging with NGO leaders or practitioners on the ground, private sector, stakeholders, and occasionally also decision makers and policy makers, as we will see later on. Solution-oriented research. So some of what we have talked about, interdisciplinary research and transdisciplinary research, can be and is often solution-oriented, not all of it. When we talk about solution-oriented in the sustainability space, that's what we mean is acknowledging the complexity of systems and looking at integrated solution. So if we generate integrated knowledge, then we can see what the trade-offs are when we design an intervention or a new policy, for example, right? So it's not enough to say we identify a problem. We need to understand the complexity and then design an intervention that tries to factor that complexity. And so it is applied research, but in a very broad sense, right? Policy relevant research, that's something, again, I've been talking a lot over the years, and I'm very passionate about, because we do receive a lot of papers, and we read a lot of papers that at the end say, my research is policy relevant. Really? Is it really policy relevant? Do you really understand the policy-making machine? Do you know at what point in the policy-making exercise the research comes in? And do you think that politicians are actually going to pay attention to it? So in a lot of the talks I've been giving about policy-relevant research based on my editorial experience, I've always emphasized that you need to have an iteration with policymakers at some form and level. Whether it's understanding how they operate, the urgency of their questions. For policymakers, some numbers are better than no numbers. For researchers, usually the numbers have to be perfect. So there are a lot of mismatch in there, and then it needs to be easily accessible. It needs to be done in response to urgent demand. So it's not easy to do it, but when it's done, it can be quite powerful, because that's ultimately what a lot of governments and local authorities are moving towards, right? Which is evidence-based policy, right? But it needs to be addressed in a different way. So some of the practical challenges to develop this kind of research, like whether it's transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or policy relevant, is obviously the current dominant model is still like rewarding heavily disciplinary backgrounds with some nice exceptions, but still not mainstream, right? The metrics used to assess performance are still the same, publishing in high-profile journals, and very often these journals are basically focusing on highly specialized research, disciplinary-oriented research, and the funding evaluation machine in many places is still reflecting this model. The other challenges are that the research context is quite specific very often for these challenges, and so the research is not designed to deliver generalizable results, and that's against the current dominant paradigm, right? So if it's not fully generalizable, then is it robust research? Do we bother doing it as researchers? The peer review of these papers, that are highly interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, is much more challenging. Assessing policy relevance is difficult, as I said before, and what are the metrics of success? Still the impact factor of journals and the number of citations? Maybe, maybe not, right? And other challenges are data gaps. We have an interesting questions to answer. We do have the methodologies, but don't have the data yet. And so there is a movement now in the sustainable development space and sustainability research to kind of emphasize the role of less conventional data sources, including social media data, citizen science data, depending on the research questions, basically. We have, and the collaborations I wanted to mention is that researchers are increasingly working with non-academic stakeholders, and this is extremely important in the sustainability space. So industry, NGO, city planners, local communities. And finally, one last thought is about a lot of it goes bottom up when it comes to collaborations with civil society, NGOs, and this is where a lot of the energy in sustainability is, and is important. But it's also important to have a global framework that can bring the countries together. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals that were signed by all of the United Nations members in September 2015 provide that kind of framework. It's obviously not perfect. There are a lot of gaps, and have been already acknowledged by researchers, but yet it's a framework that is galvanizing efforts and action, and that can be quite powerful in this space. And that's it.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes, so if you have any questions or comments, please do so. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's wonderful. My name is Wang Shen, coming from Vietnam National University. I think it's very challenging to us. So my question is that how you can share your experience how to combine the natural, social, technological, and policy science in order to reach the common goal. And then, can you share the experience how to convert scientific knowledge into the information useful for policymakers?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those are very good questions. So in terms of combining the different disciplines and areas of research to tackle problem, that's exactly the challenge that sustainability scholars, or those who want to be defined as sustainability scholars, are kind of working on. In my experience, what I've witnessed is that if people get together initially, before the research questions are defined, is the best way to go. Because there is a lot of understanding the different languages, there is a lot of trying to put on the table what are the priorities for the different disciplines around the same issue. And that requires some time. So that's one of the issues that emerged every time I spoke with researchers is time consuming. We need more time for doing interdisciplinary research because we need to understand each other's first and then agree on the question. And once we agree on the question, then we can define protocols to go about doing the research. So it's that kind of mutual understanding early on in the process that makes the difference. And also building mutual trust and working with people you mutually respect. So forcing people to do interdisciplinary research, if there is not a good kind of team culture across and buying to doing that research, is also not going to work. So there are some shortcuts, but at the same time you need to make time for it. In terms of the other question about how you make the research accessible to policymakers, so it's difficult. Some say, well, researchers cannot also do that. They have enough on their plate to produce the best research that then they shouldn't be working also on the dissemination side, and which is point taken. It's true, you have to apply for funding and projects and so on. So it is a lot. You can use experts in communication, and increasingly so, for example, in the climate change space, the IPCC is doing that. So you engage with those who know how to communicate and know the audience and know how to communicate to shorten your research down to like an executive summary or bullets that policymakers would probably pay more attention to. So there are channels you need to use that can help that dissemination in a much more accessible way. But one challenge remains, and is how long it takes for you to produce the evidence, because often policymakers are under pressure and they need it sooner.
Good. Yes, first and then next.
Thank you, Monica ma'am. Actually, the last point that I can understand from your point, until and unless the politicians came into the field, the researcher, what they are doing in their own field. We can remember the statement from the Margaret Thatcher in the year 1985. Until unless it was the global warming, it was changed into climate change. That is only due to the politician initiative. So I think that in consonance with your statement, the politicians must become ahead. As the researchers, what we are going in our laboratory, it must become into the public awareness. We can also remember the Rachel Carson's statement. Okay?
Yeah.
So I hope that you will give some interpretation regarding this.
Yes, definitely. So again, using the climate change example is quite telling that it's only by institutionalizing research at high level, at the IPCC level, across governments, that then climate change became an issue early on in policymaking. And then some countries have taken it further down the line with a more proactive behavior than others. There are still a lot of contentions with countries going in and out of the accords, but the idea is that it is discussed. It is, and there is an understanding now that institutionalization of the issue from the science into the policy happened very early. So the policymakers started to buy into at least the idea. early on. And we obviously were hoping that the Sustainable Development Goals can do the same for, sustainable development, so that there is that buy-in from politicians early on. And then scaling this down into the level of the general public, so that there is public awareness about the issue. Again, it's a combination of factors. It's obviously using the channels we can, so education and raising awareness campaign, but it can be done in a very evidence-based mode by using the research, the behavioral research that is, and the communication research that is looking at how to raise awareness about issues that might be more or less tangible to people, more distant or close to people. And a lot of research has been done in the climate change space about public awareness and how to raise it and increase it. So I think that can be replicated for other issues as well.
All right, the final, please.
Nanti Bolan from the University of Newcastle, Australia. Thank you for a very beautiful presentation. I have a comment or question regarding human intervention. There is a school of thinking that there should be minimum human intervention in solving some of the complex issues. A good example is soil remediation. I'm a soil scientist, and there was a concept called natural attenuation. When that concept was introduced, there was a public backlash saying that, you don't want to take the responsibility. You want to give it to the nature to solve the problem. Then they said, no, not natural attenuation. Let us go to monitored natural attenuation. Then again, the public was not satisfied. Then it became engineered monitored natural attenuation. So the evolution is going on. What is your view about human intervention in solving some of these complex issues?
I'm obviously not an expert here, but I take your point completely that there are issues where human intervention can create more problems than solve them, and I'm completely open to that view. So again, if evidence is showing that limiting human intervention to resolve issues is actually beneficial, then definitely that's the way to go. I think the number of problems and the variety of problems that I listed initially are such that we need to be open to a combination of different approaches, rather than go down the line of this is the only way to resolve all of the problems, because they are different. And some have clearly, a bigger room for intervening and trying to change behavior than others, where we can, facilitate nature ability to resolve the problem, absorb the impacts, and restore a health system. So from my point of view, from what I see, I think we need to consider a blend of options depending on the problems, rather than stick to one solution or kind of solution.
All right, good. Thank you, Dr. Monica, for this. Okay, thank you very much.